Hello, today we are going to talk about water resources. Now, water is something that we often don't think too much about because we have very easy access to clean water. Anybody can get clean water pretty much anywhere they go. You don't ever have to think twice if you go to a water fountain and drink from it, if it's going to be clean or not. The same water that comes out of your sink at home is the same water that fills up your toilet. So we even use clean treated water for our waste. That is not the case in many places. Now, this is a slide that you can just read over, and it talks about a few facts about water, but there are many places around the world today that still don't have access to clean water. There's some places such as, I went to Taipei, Taiwan, where there were only certain water fountains you could drink from. We went to a college campus, and they had 2 fountains on the campus you had to walk to if you wanted to drink that water. All the other water was not considered safe to drink no matter where you got it from. The same with our hotel. There was one water fountain on each floor where you could go to find drinking water, and that was a very large city, very industrialized. Then there's other places that are not industrialized where children, they don't go to school because they spend their time walking a few miles every single day to carry home dirty water to their families that a lot of times makes their family sick. And then prevents the family from working and just creates this poverty cycle that goes on and on and on. A lot of reasons that these areas have such bad water quality is because of political unrest within the nation and some other things like that, which you can look into. But basically, just be thankful for all the clean water that we have. And again, water sources around the world, it is improving, but it is still a lot of places that don't have good water. So how old is water? If you look at water in a cup, which hopefully you're drinking a lot of it, how old is that water? Well, water is the same age as the earth. So the water that you drink from your faucet with your dinner or with your breakfast is the same age as dinosaurs. So it could be water that a dinosaur drank and then peed out and then it evaporated and went right back into water and you are now consuming it. So water is the same age as it's always been because it just cycles to and from the earth. And so because of the water cycle, we have something that we call water balance. So what water balance means is that globally, the average precipitation is equal to the amount of evaporation that happens. So the same amount of water that evaporates is equal to the amount of water that precipitates back down. So there's never a time where there's not as much water as there used to be because the water does cycle. Now, the key to looking at water balance is the word globally. So it's globally balanced out, not locally. Globally, it is balanced, not locally. So why do people say you need to conserve water? Well, say you live in California and there's a big drought. Your rate of evaporation might be much higher than precipitation, meaning you don't have enough water for all the people who live there. But globally, just because it's not raining where you are living locally, that doesn't mean it's not raining somewhere else. So if we look on the whole Earth scale, meaning global, then the same amount of water evaporating is what's coming down in rain. It just may not be in the place you need it to go. So that is water balance. So water cycle is something that you've learned a lot about in middle school, so I am not going to reteach it, but you do need to review it and make sure you remember it. So the big things to remember with the water cycle are your what we call phase changes. So the vocabulary of evaporation, condensation, precipitation. Remember evaporation, going from liquid to gas, condensation, gas to liquid, precipitation, any form of rain falling down. So just make sure you're familiar with those words. So the water cycle is possible because the water can exist in 3 different phases, and those phases are solid, liquid, and gas. And it's very important that we have all those phases in order to get weather. And again, that's what makes the cycle possible, which then can give us water balance. Now, the energy source for water is the sun, or the water cycle, is the sun. Just like the sun is the energy source for all weather and everything like that. And the reason the energy is the source, or the sun is the energy source for the water cycle, is because you can't have evaporation without the sun. So that's what gets that water to be able to go up so that it can come back down. Okay, parts of the water cycle. This is what we just looked at. So Evaporation and precipitation are two words you're probably pretty familiar with, but infiltration and percolation are probably two words you don't know as well. So if water's infiltrating, that's the same thing as if we say it's percolating into the ground. And all that means is that water is moving through the ground and through the little teeny tiny cracks and spaces into little aquifers and whatnot below ground. So here's a way that you can tell the difference between these two. Infiltration is simply water going down into the ground. Percolation is the way water is moving down into the ground. So if water is going into the ground, in general, we call it infiltration, but how it's moving is the percolation. So if you look at the ground, you see all the little pores and cracks and spaces that it has. The water kind of has to dance and wiggle down through all those little teeny tiny spaces. So y'all may be too young to remember this, but do the percolator. That's a dance. So if you think of percolation as doing the percolator, infiltration water is going down, and then percolation water is like dancing or wiggling down into the ground. And if you don't know what the percolator is, then you could look up that video and have fun with that now. But that's how you can remember the difference between the two. Some other vocab as far as the water cycle goes is transpiration. That's any water released from plants. Hopefully you're familiar with that. And then runoff. Runoff is simply when water hits the ground and it does not infiltrate the ground. Instead, it just flows over the ground. And that can also lead to a lot of water pollution, which we'll look at another time. Again, just another picture of the water cycle. So fun facts. You need to drink water. 75% of your brain is water. 75% of a tree is water. If you are not drinking enough water, then your pee is probably very yellow. So that's one way you can know if you're hydrated or not. Your pee should be very light or almost clear. So look at your pee next time you go to the bathroom, see if you're hydrated or not. Being dehydrated can cause you to be tired. It can cause you to constantly feel hungry or groggy. It can cause you to be cranky and not to remember things as well. And a lot of that is because, again, 75% of your brain is water. If you don't consume enough water for your body to function properly, it won't function properly, which can lead to you not having as good of a memory, or your tiredness, or your body just says you need something, and that's why you are just tempted to eat more and more and more. So drink water, especially if you're always complaining about being sleepy. So a person can live a month without food, but only about a week without water, because again, it's important. The average total home uses, in the U.S., 80 to 100 gallons of water per day. That is a ton of water. And then another fun fact is water is one of the only things actually that actually expands when it freezes, and that's what makes it lighter, which is why ice floats. And that also is very important to the ecosystem, which you could always look into later. So let's keep going. This is just a picture showing you the different things water does in your body, but also about how much of your body is water. So you should drink about 2 liters of water a day. If you've ever seen me, I drink a big Nalgene, and that Nalgene is 1 liter. So basically 2 liters of water, it would be like 4 Aquafina water bottles. So you should drink about 4 Aquafina water bottles every single day. And if you're not doing that, you should try to increase your water a little bit. Maybe not, chug gallons or anything, but just challenge yourself to at least drink 4 glasses a day, and then you can pick it up from there. So water supply in the world. So here's the earth, and as you look at the earth, you can tell there's a ton of water. We have water in the ocean. You can see water in the skies from the clouds, and then the water is also needed for all of the trees and the life on earth. So our question is, can we use all of the water in the earth? No, even though most of the water is, or most of the earth is water, we can't use it because 97% of the water is oceans, and we can't drink the salt water. Now, can we filter salt water? Yes, but on a very small scale. It's not very efficient at filtering it, so that's not a realistic thing for us to be able to do. Only 3% of the earth is fresh water. Of that fresh water, 2% is in ice and glaciers, 0.6 is groundwater, and then 0.4 is streams, rivers, lakes, and the atmosphere. So that means less than 1% is actually usable to us because we can't use what's frozen. Sometimes the groundwater is so far down we can't get to it And obviously we can't use what's in the atmosphere until it rains down. So less than 1% is actually easy to get to and usable. Now, looking at this slide, what's most important to know is that you have the 97% for the oceans, 3% for freshwater. As far as these statistics go right here, it's basically what they ask you is the order. The majority of freshwater is in glaciers, groundwater, and then river, streams, lakes, atmosphere. They don't usually ask you about the actual percentages. They mainly just want you to know where most of it is to the least of it. So you do need to know the order of most to least over here. But I would know these numbers right here. 71% is water, 97% ocean, 3% fresh. Okay, so let's keep going. This is just a graphic showing you, so the majority, this is showing you all the earth, or all the water on the earth, and it takes this little sliver of the pie and blows it up to show you this. And that has your frozen water, then your groundwater, and that over there is where your lakes and rivers and whatnot is. So basically the usable water on Earth, if you had 100 liters or 26 gallons, that shows all the water on the Earth. And if you took half of a teaspoon out of that, that would be the water that we can actually use. And that's just crazy if you really start to think about it. So now we're going to look at how our water is used. We know how much of the Earth is water, and we know why we need water, and that water is not easily found everywhere. But how do we actually use the water that we do have? Well, 70% goes towards irrigation. When you're looking at irrigation, just in case you don't know what that means, irrigation is farming. So when they have irrigation, you're looking at the water that you use in a farm, whether that's to water the crops or the water that's going to animals, but that's your irrigation. So 70% of that. The reason why so much is used in irrigation is because we eat a lot, and food has to have a lot of water in order to be made or grown or to live. 20% goes to industry. This is going to be any type of factory that you have, so water that's being used to package the food that we eat or to make the clothes that you have or your cell phone, stuff like that. And then 10% is actually going to be used by cities and residents. So this is going to be the water that you personally use. The water that you drink, the water you use to brush your teeth or take a bath, all that stuff. These three percentages are extremely important to know. So a lot of this unit is just going to be things that you have to memorize, and that is one of those things. So make sure you know it. So how much water is used to make this? These are just a couple just fun facts, I guess. A pair of blue jeans. If you want to take a guess, you can, but to make one pair of blue jeans, it takes about 2,000 gallons of water. So as much water as it would take to fill up a swimming pool is how much water is used to make a pair of blue jeans. What about a plastic bottle with no water in it? How many gallons do you think is used to make that? About 3. So 3 gallons of water just to make this one little plastic bottle. One single sheet of computer paper. How much water do you think is used to make that? Again, about 3 gallons. So it takes the same amount of water to make a single sheet of paper as it does a plastic water bottle. And what about a loaf of bread? You could think about this as bigger than a hot dog bun, but a loaf of bread, this is going to take about 144 gallons of water. Then you have a pound of chicken. A lot of you probably eat chicken for dinner or lunches. And so if we are looking at this, it is going to take about 500 gallons of water. So this is including the water used to raise the chicken before we eat it. So about 500 gallons just to go into 1 pound. What about a hamburger with the bun, lettuce, and tomato? Now this number is going to vary depending what you look at because the bun can vary and all sorts of stuff. But this will take about 670 gallons, if not more, just to make a single hamburger. Now, when we look at the different foods, the reason I'll show you later why it's important to realize how much water is used to make these different items, because it goes back into how we conserve water. So next, we are going to talk about how we use water in our homes. So think about where you use the majority of the water when you're at home, or how your family personally does. Well, looking at just water in general in the U.S., most goes to agriculture, which we already know because of 70%. But the water we're actually using in our house, that was the 10% for cities and residents. Most of that is going to be used to wash, clean, and flush the toilets. So that's where we use the majority of our water for. Typically, in an industrialized nation such as the U.S., people use about 700 to 1,000 gallons a week. The U.S. uses more water than just about any other industrialized country, other areas. So we use about 151 gallons of water a day compared to about 5 gallons the average African family uses. And then Europe uses about 66 gallons. So they would be a little bit more comparable in terms of the level of being industrialized. But you can see the drastic difference of water. And the water that the U.S. uses increases every year. Now, a lot of times people look at this and they're like, oh my gosh, America is just so awful, blah, 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 blah. Well, you're the one using the water, so don't just say Americans are awful. It's all of us. Now, think about how long the showers you take. You really don't need to take a shower longer than 10 minutes. But most of the time when I say that, students, think I'm crazy. Or like towels. You can reuse the towel that you dry off with from the shower at least once. You don't have to wash towels every single time you use one. Those are the things that we use to conserve water. Another reason Americans use so much water is we have a very high standard of living. Now, a lot of us, eat meat with the majority of our meals. Well, you saw how much water was used to make a single hamburger or 1 pound of chicken. Because most Americans, our level of poverty is different than it is other areas of the world. What we consider to be poor is actually what other areas consider to be rich. We tend to have more, and we use more, and we buy more, and we can eat more than what a lot of people in different areas of the world have. And that's why we use so much water. And so that's why we got to be a little bit more mindful about how we conserve it. So why not use the ocean water? If you would like to look at this link later in the video that's posted online, you can. It explains it. But basically, it's just, we can technically do it, but it can't be done on a large scale, and it's very inefficient in terms of energy and cost. So based on all this, it's important that we can conserve water. So you can think of all the different ways you can conserve water, but a few examples, actually eating less meat. So if you have a couple vegetarian meals throughout the week, that can increase, that is one way to conserve water. Reuse a towel every once in a while, that conserves water. Taking shorter showers, turning the water off when you're brushing your teeth, all of those things are ways that you can conserve water. And this is looking at why we use more. I already mentioned the thing about we eat more meat than people used to in the past. That uses the more water. And then we were one of the first countries to really get a large system of pipelines for our water. And as that happens, there's wear and tear on those pipes. And so we actually lose a lot of water to leaking. But going in and fixing those pipes, that's an extremely complicated, extremely expensive thing to do. So that's going to be a very slow process. So how do we conserve water? Well, we're specifically going to look at how agriculture can conserve water, because agriculture is where 70% of the water is going towards. So one method is called a drip line irrigation. In drip line irrigation, you have a pipe that is, or a hose, like a water hose that is going down by the crops, which you can see right down here. And these the hose, they have little holes on them, and from those holes you have a little bit of water that drips out, and they can drip down directly to the root of the plant. And as it drips just to the root of the plant, you're minimizing the amount of water that's being lost to evaporation, and you're not having to spray water everywhere. It's just going exactly to where it needs to go. So that can save 80% of more water than just spraying with a sprinkler can. So that's what we call drip line irrigation. Another thing farmers can do is they collect water. So this is not a natural pond. This would be like a man-made pond, or a retaining pond is what some people call it. And so basically you can dig like a big pool, and this water is very muddy. It's not treated. It's just rainwater that fell on the ground. But rather than having to collect it and treat it and then put it on your crops. You can just take this muddy water and put it directly on the crops. And sometimes I have students that say, ew, that's disgusting. Well, the plants already grow in dirt, so who cares if you put a little bit more mud on it? They're just getting more dirt and water, which is what they need. So if farmers can collect water and then put that on their crops, it saves water, because instead of all this rainwater going to places they don't need it, they can move it to the areas that are in most need of water, which is why they do that. So then you have drought tolerant crops. So a drought is when you don't have as much water as you need. So if you've ever heard of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, this is one of the things we're looking at, especially in countries that have seasons where you don't get much rain. They can actually grow and genetically engineer things such as corn to not need as much water and still be able to grow. And this is one thing scientists do, and they send it off to countries where they don't have as much food, or they do have a lot of poverty, because simply their climate helps keep families in poverty. And so scientists will create these crops that don't need as much water in order to help feed those people and relieve hunger around the world, which is actually a very cool thing if you want to look more into it. But that's just one of the many things that ways that you can genetically modify things. They also have genetically modified rice in order to put more nutrients in it for those countries that don't have as much food, in order to keep their nutrition up. But all those are things you can look into later. Okay, so this is just a good spot to take a brain break, because I'm sure you're probably tired of listening to me talk and fly through these notes. So this is kind of a fun thing to try to do, but if you can try to think of two different pictures and you can draw one. Excuse me, this isn't the drawing brain break. I'm going to flip to the next slide, and there's going to be pictures, and you'll have to find as many of the little hidden pictures in the big one as you can find. So I'll just put it on the next slide, and you can pause the video and try to find as many as you can. So these are the things on the sides. So there's 7 of these little camper, 5 mountains, 9 campfires. So within a few minutes, just see how many of these different pictures you can find within this big one.